At the General Hospital in the theater of operation, other skilled teams of surgeons and nurses stood ready to take over where the frontline hospitals left off. Whether a hospital is under canvas out in the field or in a solid structure in a city, its routine, like the nurse's routine, doesn't vary, and its principal aim remains fixed: to offer the best possible medical care to the sick and wounded. Nurses sterilized the operating equipment, the surgical gowns and gloves, prepared drugs, laid out the instruments which the doctor needed for his next operation, and kept accurate records of each patient's history and progress. While in a civilian hospital, the ratio is usually 1 nurse to every 3 beds. In an Army hospital, it is always many times that number. To help lift the burden from the nurse's shoulders, enlisted technicians trained in special schools are assigned to work under her direct supervision. One of her biggest jobs is to teach these technicians both in the classroom and in the hospital wards. This means added responsibility for the nurse, for although she has less personal contact with her patients, she has to direct the activities of the personnel assigned to her so that the treatment and well-being of her patients is assured. Relaxation and entertainment are an important part of medical treatment. To this general hospital overseas came an all-star show, and the Army nurse shared the fun with her patients, to whom the sound of laughter from home often meant more than medicine. Later on, she may have spent a few minutes with the star. And there were times when she herself was the star of the show, like this nurse, the first woman to land on Bougainville. The umpire calls batter up, and the game is on. Army versus Army, as the nurses play the WACS. This infield will never play in the polo grounds, but one of their patients might. Off duty for a while, some nurses strolled through the streets and buildings of ancient cities. Others preferred a round of golf, or a swim somewhere if the weather was right. Then it was always back to duty, back to the sick and wounded, back to the hospital, around which the life of an Army nurse revolves. Those patients scheduled for a trip back home for the final period of convalescence travel on a hospital ship as fully equipped as a stationary hospital. Now, as before, the Army nurse stands by ready to minister to every need. Next stop, a debarkation hospital. Then a general hospital in the United States and complete recovery. And this is the end of the long chain of evacuation, the general hospital back home. Here, the Army nurse works patiently with her hands, her head, and her heart. Here, she gently guides men back to the way of life they fought to protect. Although she might have volunteered to serve overseas, although she might chafe at what she considered the inactivity of working in a hospital in the United States or Alaska or Panama, the Army nurse soon learned that a battle line was wherever a soldier was stationed. What words of praise can measure up to these women whose very lives are given to nursing sick and wounded men? 1 million sick and wounded men, back to life and health. And yet praise is offered. Long hours of tireless service were remembered and recognized. The Army nurse, decorated for bravery and valor above and beyond the call of duty. And these nurses, imprisoned for 3 long years by the Japanese, asked only that they be returned to duty, for they could never forget the faces of American men tortured and killed by the enemy. Wherever transports took our soldiers, they also took the Army nurse, to work by day, by night, on distant battlefields, to help make shattered bodies whole, to bring smiles to faces twisted with pain, to serve at the side of the American soldier during peace and war. This is the Army Nurse USA, ready to serve anywhere, under any circumstances, in time of need.
During the past 4 years, 57,000 graduate registered nurses have served with the medical department of the Army. For us, the war is not yet over. Many nurses are still being sent to overseas theaters to care for American soldiers. These are replacements for nurses who served overseas during the war. And the war is not yet over for many of our patients. More than 300,000 patients are in Army hospitals throughout this country, many of whom will be forced to remain there for a long time to come. These men are not asking for much. They have never asked for much. They are the most wonderful patients in the world. But the war has cost them much more than any of us have been asked to give. Army nurses seldom ask for much either. But today, they are asking you to buy a bond.